India-US trade deal is hitting turbulence, months of negotiations, high-level meetings, and repeated assurances, but India is refusing to blink. Sources say that India has rejected a rushed trade agreement with the United States, insisting that it will sign a deal only if it protects India's interests. With fresh trade partnership, a stronger economy, and falling oil prices, India believes that it is negotiating from a position of strength. But with President Donald Trump preparing a fresh round of tariffs, the clock is ticking. Now, despite months of negotiation and expectations of an interim agreement, India and the United States have failed to reach a consensus so far. Now, according to sources, the sticking points remain tariffs. India wants a clear trade advantage over competitors like China, and assurances that Washington will not impose fresh tariffs after a deal is signed. Meanwhile, New Delhi has made it clear that it will not compromise on sensitive sectors, particularly the agriculture sector. Although India has strongly pushed back against reports claiming that trade talks with the United States have hit a deadlock. Union Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal has dismissed the reports as completely false, baseless and misleading, insisting that the negotiations between the two countries remain on track. He said that he had fantastic meetings with US Trade Representative Jamieson Greer during his visit to New Delhi in June. Now, according to the Commerce Minister, both India and the United States reaffirmed their commitment to concluding a trade agreement that is balanced, commercially meaningful. The United States, on the other hand, is seeking a quicker market access and expects India to make greater concessions. The Donald Trump administration is also preparing a round of new tariffs, which could come into effect later this month. Now, currently, most Indian exports to the United States face a 10% tariff, but Washington is considering even steeper duties, including proposed tariffs of up to 12.5% on several countries, including India. And now, despite the pressure, India is showing little urgency. Analysts say that New Delhi's confidence comes from improving economic fundamentals. India's exports rose nearly 15% during the April-June quarter. Now, despite global disruptions, exports to Gulf nations have rebounded strongly, while shipments to the United States have also increased. India is simultaneously expanding trade with other major economies. And just for an example, it's the free trade agreement with the United Kingdom that is set to take effect from this month, while negotiations with the European Union are also progressing side by side. Now, lower global oil prices, a stronger growth outlook, and a weaker rupee is boosting exports. It has also further strengthened India's bargaining position in the India-US trade deal. India appears willing to wait rather than accept a deal on unfavorable terms. And for now, the message from New Delhi seems clear that no deal is better than a bad deal. I am being joined by Raja Karthike, who's an international affairs expert from Takshila University. Welcome on the show. Mr. Karthike, I want to ask you that India appears to have drawn a red line, although Piyush Goyal has come out and he has made it clear that the reports are false and the talks are progressing further. But in the end of the day, we still don't have a deal with the US. My question to you would be that do you think that it's better for India to wait and sign the deal on better terms, or do you think that this is going to cost India heavy tariffs that will outweigh the benefits of waiting?
Thank you, Nancy. Firstly, India has had high tariffs irrespective of what it has done or not done.
Okay.
Over the past year, the US relationship has gone through a real roller coaster.
Correct.
And we saw at one point tariffs as high as 50%. Now, at this point, the US has brought it down to 25%. They say they're willing to bring it down to 18%. But the fact is, we don't know how, after the US court's ruling on the president's power to impose tariffs overall, which happened, the US court's ruling that happened in earlier this year, in March. I think we are at a point when we really do not know who calls the shots when it comes to trade in the US, let's be fair. And similarly, when after the midterm elections that will take place to Congress in November, in case the Democrats were to seize a majority, what would be the, how would they negotiate or how would they restrain the Trump administration's ability to impose tariffs in trade? We have to see this. So what is the urgency for India then to rush into a deal without knowing how exactly the, shall we say, the cookie is crumbling when it comes to US trade within the US system itself?
But Mr. Karthike, tariff seems to be a sticking point between both the countries, and it has been delayed. The deal has been delayed because India wants a competitive edge over countries like China or other countries in the South Asia. How crucial is it for India to stick to that demand and not bow down?
This is not a question of, how shall I say, it's not something that you can say is our ego issue, that I need to have tariffs that are
Absolutely.
X%, right?
Right.
But the fact is that uh, India is somehow, there is a perception in India right now that we are not being treated as a partner
As an
for the last
equal.
25 years, as a, well, I should say as a partner for the US.
Okay.
The US has done a lot to enable India's rise, and a lot of India's rise has been based on the economic partnership between the US and India.
Absolutely.
Even, for example, even last year, FDI from the US was about $11 billion. It has, doubled in recent years. So the difficulty that we have, the services trade is still doing well. It's almost on par. There is neither country. The US has a marginal trade surplus, but it's almost completely equal. So the difficulty we have is when it comes to the goods trade. But when it comes to the goods trade, the US also has to understand that India as a developing country can only afford a certain terms and cannot afford certain terms, particularly in areas that employ large scale manpower, such as agriculture. So
Correct.
that's where for the US to impose again tariffs, for example, as high as 50% when it comes to steel, which also is an area that employs a lot of people in India. This is also very hurtful for the Indian economy. So I believe this trade deal should be approached not as a trade deal, but as a test for the larger US-India partnership per se, and it should be negotiated with, in that same manner.
Well, that's right. You're correctly pointing it out that it's also a test of the relations that we have with the United States, and it has been seen a lot of up and downs. But Mr. Karthike, do you think that India is, let's just say that India is not delaying the same, and we might be able to sign a deal with the US, but there are some really important points, since like you have mentioned that agriculture remains a problem, oil remains a problem, tariffs remains a sticking point as well. Do you think that the United States and India will be able to crack a deal that is balanced, as Trade Minister likes to call it, and is commercially beneficial for both the sides?
Absolutely. I believe that the two sides, the fundamentals in the relationship are still strong. Okay. So for the two sides, there was also another word that I think it was the US Trade Representative, Mr. Grierson, used it, which is Jameson Greer used it as reciprocal, and I think reciprocal, and I would add the word respectful. Respectful of each other's concerns. There are certain domestic constituencies for the Trump administration. For example, they say that California's agricultural industry is very crucial. They're crucial donors for the Trump administration, so they also sort of want certain things from this deal with India. But it is also the case that for the Modi government in India, there are agriculture remains a very important constituency for any government that is in power in India. So we do have UP elections coming up. So in two democracies where there are very strong constituents, I think it has to be seen more than are we, trading equally. I should also give you a parallel, for example, of the India-China bilateral, trade relationship.
Right.
Now, the trade deficit between India and the US is roughly about $58.2 billion.
Right.
Now, $58 to $60 billion, depending on which statistics you go by. But on the other hand, the trade deficit when it comes to the India-China relationship is almost $100 billion, and that's in favor of China. Now, imagine if this is how the US is talking to us for a deficit of $58 billion, how should India be approaching China for a $100 billion deficit? So should we take a far more strident tone with China? The fact is that when it comes to the world of international trade, yes, the US may have other places to buy from, but India also has other places to sell to. as we
Correct.
are seeing in the spate of FTAs that you spoke about. So I think it's important that both sides approach it with respect. And I believe that after the midterm elections, India will have greater visibility, will have greater certainty into how things are shaping up in the US political system. And therefore, hopefully, before the end of the year, they'll be able to clinch a deal.
Mr. Karthike, before I let you go, I want you to reflect more since you were talking about that even India now has more places to sell to. How crucial do you think that it was a smart move? Because the initial position, then when we went for a trade agreement and when we went for a talk, we did not have a lot of these FTAs. Now we have an FTA coming up with the UK. We have a deal signed with the European Union. Do you think that this was a smart move by India to make sure that it's not dependent and diversify its market and their trade partners as well? And how critical are these FTAs going to play out while negotiating with US?
Well, there's certainly part of signaling. This happens in the international system that you are working with another actor in order to. It's partly even called the audience effect. You
Right.
are you put it's part of the signals that you send to the other side that look, if not you, we have others. But to be honest, I do not believe that any of these other actors that India has signed an agreement with have the market or the capacity to fully substitute for the US
Right.
in terms of because there are specific sectors that we are working with the US on. For example, even when it comes to services trade, our IT industry is very closely tied to that of the US.
Absolutely.
So to what extent will we be able to diversify in the short term? I'm not sure. These trade agreements that have been signed are therefore certainly part of signaling. They'll take some time to come into effect. And India needs a diverse market for its goods and services, no doubt about that. But one should not read, I believe, too much into the impact that these FTAs will make in the outcome of the US-India trade deal negotiations themselves.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Raja Karthike, for taking out the time and
Thank you
joining
so
me on the
much.
broadcast with those meaningful insights.